Hey, come join us for a little group therapy. We have Josh Guest, we have Dalen Flowers, we have Zach Mareth, and we're going to be talking about the Ole Miss Rebels loss to the Kentucky Wildcats and get ready for the South Carolina Gamecocks on ESPN at 2:30 next week. It should be a lot of fun, but this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I know we got beat, and I know I should be down right now, but I am so excited because my Detroit Tigers are going to be playing the Houston Astros on Tuesday on ABC at 2:30 in the afternoon. They're in the playoffs. Whoever told me being a Detroit Tigers fan was going to be hard obviously did not know what the hell they were talking about. Hello, I'm Steven Willis from the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and I'm joined by Josh Guest and Zach Mareth from the Rebel Walk and Dalen Flowers from the Dalen Show. We're going to have a good time and talk a little bit about this ball game. How you doing, Dalen?
Doing good, man. Well, as good as I can be following yesterday, but I'm doing pretty good, man.
Yeah, you were in the stands for that. You were tweeting that while it was going on. Me and you both almost at the same time said, okay, we're just redoing the 2022 game. And the only difference is Ole Miss, there was no illegal procedure penalty to save Ole Miss this time. It was interesting.
Yeah, it was a gut check feeling, man. It was a very humbling weekend for us. I mean, and it's honestly well-deserved, I think. I think that we got in over our heads. And I think, you talked about this, and I've been saying this via Twitter since I haven't been on, but Kentucky's a really good football team. And I think our fans didn't give them the credit going into this weekend that Kentucky deserved. I mean, Brock Vandagriff didn't have a perfect game yesterday, but he worked his tail off yesterday. I mean, Brock made a lot of plays happen for Kentucky. I thought Mark Stoops coached an incredible game. Kentucky, I don't know why they played and coached like their entire lives depended on it yesterday, but I got to give a lot of credit to Kentucky before I can even go too far into what our team showed yesterday.
Yeah, Kentucky played as well as they could play, and Ole Miss played absolutely atrociously, allowed Mark Stoops to muck up the game. He made it to where time of possession, they slowed it way down. Ole Miss had some problems offensively, and on tomorrow's podcast, I talk about, hey, Jackson Dart might be leaning too much on Trey Harris right now. He's 40% of the pass offense there. All these other weapons that Ole Miss are paying for through the Grove Collective, they probably need to get involved. But in the first half, Ole Miss played really down, and it was the only way that Kentucky could win this game. I said that if Ole Miss played bad and Kentucky played perfectly, you'd be looking at a 16-13 game in the fourth quarter with Kentucky driving the ball. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. It was 17-13, and Kentucky was able to get it into the end zone. Josh, how you doing, buddy?
Steven, I'm doing well. I'm glad you're able to find joy in your Tigers. I'm a lifelong Mariners fan, King Griffey Jr. And A-Rod back in the day, and then Randy Johnson. So, but King Griffey Jr. is my favorite player of all time. But the Mariners did get to the playoffs a couple of times, but they've never paid it off big time for me. So much in line with your thinking as I can be. But congrats on the Tigers. I actually texted that out to a couple of people yesterday that if Jackson Dart didn't start looking at people other than Trey Harris, we would have this all season long, and we may not win another SEC game because I don't care how good you are, because Trey Harris is good. We saw it, 176, third time over 175 this season, but 1 for 10 on third down, Stephen. 1 for 10. That's not characteristic of what this team can be, should be, or is. And so that's got to be better, however it's better. I know that I was getting messages about where's pre-scoring. I'm yelling at the TV, let's throw it to Daquan Wright. I think Juice had a big drop at one point. But what was it, three plays defensively we gave drive extenders on, and then we gave up the big fourth down play, which I'm bitter about, but I'm not going to whine because I felt like anyway, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Now, like I said, I'm misspelling all kinds of stuff on the right side of the screen because I was in a hurry before the podcast, so I apologize for that. Like I said, I should have left it alone. I knew that. It was like the difference between muck and mucked. And I went in to change that. And when I did that, everything got messed up. And I'm like, oh, the show's getting ready to start. So I apologize to everybody because I look like an absolute idiot whenever that looks like that. And I am so sorry. So Zach, you with the Rebel Walk, Lane Kiffin's meeting tonight, he was like, hey, Kentucky's a good team. This is a very good defense. I talked about all week how this was the second best defense that Ole Miss was going to see this season behind the Georgia Bulldogs. And they had some offensive weapons on the outside that could make you hurt. And lo and behold, that all came to fruition. But I don't think the defense played poorly Saturday. Now, that 4th and 7 that they gave up at the end of the game is unexcusable. There's no getting around that. But this was an offensive problem Saturday.
1,000%, Steven. In Kentucky, they had the ball almost double the amount of time that Ole Miss did. And I thought the defense brought their energy pretty consistently throughout the game. We saw in Wake Forest the other week, they were laying down like every other play because they were exhausted. And we didn't see that a lot this week. I thought they responded well. But, just talking about that 4th and 6 or 7 play, whichever that was, when you send the house like that, you have to get the quarterback, especially when you have, your number 2 corner because your number 1's out guarding arguably the fastest player in college football. Like, you got to get to the quarterback. And I hope we learn from this because I've never experienced that in a stadium, going from that loud to that quiet in a matter of seconds. And it was demoralizing. And then, they get the fumble that bounces into the end zone, just a series of unfortunate events. But again, Kentucky played a hell of a game and Ole Miss did not. From the opening kickoff, there was that Micah Davis where he potentially fumbled. Vibes were weird and the game was just, it continued to get weirder for Ole Miss. And when you don't execute and you don't create turnovers like Kentucky did, you can't expect to win in the SEC.
Dalen, that first half was potentially the worst half of football I've seen from Ole Miss football in probably 15 years, probably since the Orgeron era. Ole Miss ran the ball in a true running play with a running back 3 times in the first half. All passes, it seemed like, were 25 yards downfield. It was duck and chuck. It was like 3 and out, throw it deep, throw it deep, throw it deep, and let's see if it would work. Now, Jackson, there were some receivers that were open, but Jackson was a little bit off. This is something uncharacteristic we have seen, that he was a couple of feet off on his deep ball. He was a little bit off on whenever he threw a slant. It was a little bit too low. He wasn't quite right. And nobody can throw a perfect game every single time. People are going to have games like this. And it was just unfortunate that Ole Miss didn't have the run game to fall back on. That everybody's going to say, well, whenever we ran the ball, they weren't successful. Well, they didn't try. Henry Parrish averaged like 5 yards per carry. And where is Ulysses Bentley? Where is Rashad Amos? Where are all these running backs that Ole Miss is paying for? Yeah. That is something that I want to know.
100%, man, because we had 12 rushes in the first half for 32 yards, and 3 of them came off quarterback draws from Jackson Dart. And that's something else that I would love to see kind of disappear as well. We're not finding any consistency from the quarterback draws. It scares me every time he does it. We get success from Jackson running from regular scrimmage play and scrambling out of the pocket. And as much as we want to talk about the pass game, it's not becoming effective, like you just said. We're taking a lot of deep ball threats. We're not using the middle of the field effectively. We're not using the short passes effectively. But also our running game is just it's not being used correctly. It's not successful at all. And look, we can talk about this all we want, but we've known this in the past years. A Lane Kiffin offense runs successfully when the run game is efficient. And when it's stagnant like it is, when it's getting 1 or 2 yards every single game, and we're not getting it open up on the offensive line, that requires Jackson Dart to try to make something out of nothing every single time he drops back to throw the ball. And that was a lot yesterday. Josh said, I saw Trey Harris make a lot of great plays. Don't get me wrong. We would have been screwed. He was fantastic. Worse if it wasn't for Trey.
Yeah.
But I don't know where the organization of everything else that I saw last year happened. Jordan Watkins, I know he's been dealing with injuries, but his success that I've seen he can do, we haven't used him. Juice Wells has been used, but it was a little inconsistent yesterday. Like Caden Prescorn, I tweeted Friday night, I expect to have Caden Prescorn to have basically a home run game yesterday. He had, I think, the one catch in the late in the game, and that was it. we're not seeing the weapons being used so far. And even like last year, we had Dayton Wade that would go down and make some crazy catches and get in the middle of the field and just run upfield. We have a lot of weapons and they're not being used. And I think that's just going to take some consistent time working with the play calls. And, hopefully we haven't even seen the full repertoire of what the offensive play calling is, but it really has to get figured out right now, or it's going to be a long, long rest of the season for us, because now it's really tic-tac time now. We didn't expect to be in this position. Now we got to go to South Carolina on the road, another really good team, another good defensive front, a good linebacking core, and now we really have to game plan so we're not 0-2 at conference play.
All right, when we come back, we will continue to talk with Dalen, Zach, and Josh, because this South Carolina game, with Ole Miss losing this game to Kentucky, every goal that they had before the season still exists, thanks to the 12-team playoff. Everything is there. If Ole Miss wins out, they are going to host a playoff game. That's not going to change. But the problem is now Ole Miss has the pressure of winning each and every week for the remainder of the season, and they weren't planning on doing that. So they need to fix the issues that they have had early on in the season. We'll talk about that and a little bit more right after this. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports books. Right now, you can get the Ole Miss Rebels and the South Carolina Gamecocks, I think at 9.5 or something like that is the betting line on that game. The over-under, I think, is at 51.5, somewhere around there. That would be interesting numbers that you might be interested in. But if you have a hunch in the middle of the game and you want to bet on something, you can now check out the latest stats, view the latest play-by-play, and more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. I want to welcome a new partner to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. It's College Corner, your one-stop shop for all things Ole Miss. Game day is just around the corner, and this week the fans are rocking powder against South Carolina. Whenever they do their garnet out, you're going to see a nice little circle of powder in the corner. So head on over to the College Corner to pick up your perfect game day gear, and Scott's going to get a bunch of Galaxy Realtree tumblers and more stuff on the way that you can shop at their locations in Flowood and Ridgeland or in Oxford. Whether you're gearing up for football, basketball, or baseball, College Corner has you covered. They're located off of Sisk Avenue, right across from the new Chick-fil-A. Getting to the store is a breeze, and they have plenty of parking. And for those of you out of state, no worries. Visit collegecornerstore.com, where they turn around orders lightning fast. Trust me, this isn't a sales pitch. College Corner is where I get all of my Rebel gear. So visit collegecornerstore.com or stop by the College Corner today. All right, gentlemen. We talked about how this is now going to be must wins all the time, Zach. It just is. The point where there is no margin for error. If Ole Miss is to have a successful season, and the goal of this team was playoffs or bust, national championship, it would be a disservice to them to start gaslighting. And you already seen people talking about trying to change the narratives, like, oh, we just need to get to a bowl game. No, it's playoffs or bust. Respect the players with what their goal is, and their goal was national title and playoffs. So we are still going to talk about the playoffs as it goes. But to get there, Ole Miss has to win at South Carolina. They have to win at LSU. They have to beat Oklahoma. They have to win the game at Arkansas. That is 4 really tough games, including 2 places they have not won since 2008. Can Ole Miss do it?
Steven, they can. They have all the talent to do it. And, what I'm looking for this weekend is, how Ole Miss responded after their loss to Alabama last year. They hosted LSU, won in that incredible 55-49 game, and it was a week.
Offense looked great.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. They were doing jet sweeps and QB draws all game against Bama, and then LSU came around, and it was Trey Harris, Caden Prescorn, Watkins, D-Wade. Everyone else is getting the ball. So I'm looking for a similar response there. It's also worth acknowledging that Ole Miss is 12th in the AP poll. So if we did go by the AP poll, they would still be in the playoffs. So, people recognize that the talent's there and the coaching's there, and these players, they have what it takes to be a playoff contending team. But again, South Carolina is no easy task, but you have to win this. And then you give yourself a chance to go make a statement down in Baton Rouge. But it starts with establishing the run game on the road, And the players said it going to Wake Forest. You got to pack your defense and pack your run game. So if you bring those two things, you hope that Ole Miss can escape South Carolina with a win.
Josh, Zach mentioned this earlier, but after Ole Miss lost to Alabama, this Kentucky game was basically the Alabama game. Don't give me the number besides the name or anything like that. But if you looked at the actual game, this was the Alabama game. The offense looked remarkably similar, incredibly predictable. There was a whole lot of questions of things they needed to do. And then the LSU game, they fixed it. So I'm assuming now this game in South Carolina is on the road. Williams-Brice is a difficult place to play, and they are going to be unbelievably amped up over this whole Juice Wells stuff that they've been basically simmering on for 9 months. But do you see this offense making a turn?
Well, Steven, I actually wrote down a couple of notes in between there, your break, and this segues perfectly into what I wrote down. We got to remember these are young men. These are college students. These are young players. And I've been in college work my entire professional life, so I have a soft spot for college kids. And we got to remember that. I mean, don't pile on them. To me, this is a coach issue.
Yeah.
The coaches, you would think after the Alabama game last year that we would not see a game like this. So I don't want to pile on the coaches too bad, but to me, this is a Lane Kiffin, Charlie Weiss issue on the offensive side, and they got to fix it. And I love the guys to death, but they got to fix it. And so I almost wonder if the whole communication in the earpiece is not didn't hurt us in this game, where maybe Trey Harris looked like he was in a good spot, but because of the prowess of the Kentucky defense, he wasn't always there, or the pressure on Dart was there, and it just made him uncomfortable enough to force bad throws. So I think that the coaches, I'm just going to call the coaches out. I don't know. I'm reluctant to call the players out. I know they get paid. They're not the ones that made the decision to do it. They are making the most of it, as well they should. But the coaches got to do better calling plays, and then the players do have to execute. But we got to get more people involved. It's just plain and simple. More people got to get involved.
All right, so I want to get everybody's opinion on this, okay? Ole Miss has done the kinder, gentler spring training that had a hot dog eating contest and a dunk contest and the whole 9 yards during spring. The obviously kinder, gentler fall camp as well. I mean, this is all stuff that they bragged about that they were doing things a different way. But this past week, going up to the Kentucky game, Lane Kiffin said that the non-conference game did not prepare his team for SEC play, and he hoped practice did it. Well, practice obviously did not, if that first half was any indication. Do you think that a more full-fledged fall camp and spring practice is necessary in the future, or was this just an aberration? Zach?
Yeah, you bring a good point, Steven, but, comparing what we were saying earlier, they did that hard-nosed type spring and fall camp last year, and it was the same deal when we went to Tuscaloosa. Now, obviously, playing Alabama is a much better opponent than Kentucky. But again, it's you could say that, but also at the same time, the team looked incredibly unprepared. After that first scripted drive, I was concerned the entire game, and Kentucky really did dominate on both sides of the line of scrimmage, especially that defensive line, that defensive front, and they proved that they were a lot better than Ole Miss just practicing against themselves, which obviously you can imagine it's a different set of coaches and a different set of players. But it definitely brings up an argument, and I'm curious what you guys think as well.
Go ahead, Josh.
Well, I think it's more about the first four games than it is the gentler, kinder spring. If they didn't prepare
and fall. The fall is the more important thing.
Yeah. No, it seemed like maybe that was good enough, but maybe not. I think, and I don't necessarily think it was the level of competition. I think, in my opinion, it got to somebody's head, whether that's the coach's head, the player's head, all of them. I think that the first four games where we completely dominated, even playing poorly, which we didn't clean up everything in Georgia Southern from Wake Forest. And so,
the penalties have been a problem.
That's right. That was kind of a warning sign. And I even said this yesterday to somebody that the defensive penalties have become sort of that thing that the offensive holding was last year. I know you talked about it some too, but I think it bore itself out. because, I mean, yes, we could all whine. We got called too many times and they didn't get called enough and all that other stuff. But the calls are the calls, and you got to play the game.
And they're getting a reputation. They are.
Yes. And I think it's going to follow us the rest of the season. It's going to make it very, very difficult for the defense to stop a 4th and 7 or any other play for that matter. So,
and Barry and Brown absolutely pushed off on that 4th and 7.
Yeah, I wanted to say it, but you brought it up. Even to the point where
absolutely.
Greg McElroy on the contract.
Worse than what Trey Harris did against Georgia Southern.
Oh, much worse.
They called it out on the broadcast. He perfectly timed push off. They called it out on the broadcast.
Yeah. But they got it. They made the play, and Barry and Brown. Listen,
it was a ballsy call that worked out.
It was an unbelievably ballsy call by Mark Stoops, because after the Georgia game where he punted with like 3 minutes to go in the game from midfield, I mean, going forward on 4th and 7 from your own 20-yard, not only that, doing what I call a duck and chuck that whole time, just drop back 3 steps and just throw it up. And Ole Miss was in man coverage. They had a perfect isolated thing with Barry and Brown, and it was just there. It worked. It was a play that you lost at the exact wrong time. It's like we said, this was the perfect storm for Kentucky in this game, and they needed the perfect storm to win this game. And congratulations for making that happen. But if Ole Miss would have played remotely well, they would not have been in that situation. Now, when we come back, we are going to continue to talk about the South Carolina Gamecocks and Ole Miss Rebels game. Stick around for that. Game Time is the place to get all of your Ole Miss tickets. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying those Ole Miss tickets. We've all been in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, and there's not a bad seat in the place, but this place has it to where you can see exactly what the view will be from that seat before you buy the ticket. Lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all of the customer service bells and whistles that you're looking for, Game Time has. So take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets with Game Time. And with this being the most anticipated season in Ole Miss history, probably a little bit less anticipated at the moment, I might be able to help you out with tickets as well. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right. Games in Columbia, Williams-Brice Stadium. The place is going to be rocky. Darn it out, because South Carolina has a weird fetish of overjuice wells, and they're going to rock out because of this. They're going to be out there. I am so thankful, Dalen, that this is not a night game.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fun one, and I think like what you were just talking about, it's going to be a 4-quarter game. And that's something that I think the first 4 games didn't prepare us for. But we got to be prepared for every single quarter, every single outcome for South Carolina. Look, I thought Kentucky did a good job with the double quarterback scheme. They kind of threw our defense off at loops as well. So, depending on the availability of Lenore Sellers this upcoming week, we may see South Carolina do a little bit of that with Robbie Ashford. So I think our defense needs to be prepared for that. It's going to be a tough game, from the line of scrimmage to both sides of the ball. I think that South Carolina has done a good job on both sides of the ball. I mean, they should have a little bit more, few more wins than they do. Rocky Sanders has done a great job for them as well. It's going to be a tough physical SEC game for us, and it's going to be one of the trenches. I think really it's going to be how do we respond to adversity. We've been all cute and pretty all off season and through these first couple of games. Now we got hit in the mouth. It's going to be how we respond. And if things don't go our way in the first couple of possessions, how do we keep trying to change and adapt? I think one of the things that I heard Jackson Dart say in the post-game press conference yesterday is that he wished that we kind of adjusted better, more quicker. And I think that's something that we need to do better. I mean, we can't continue to do the same. That's going insane. You can't do the same things over and over again and expect different results. We need to do better with adjustments. And I don't know where that's going to come from or how that's going to happen, but it needs to happen in order for us to get to the heights that this team should and can reach if we want to see that happen.
Hey, Zach, this was the first SEC game where Ole Miss played probably in a long time where they were the hunted. They were literally going to get Kentucky's best effort, and they were excited to come down to Oxford to prove themselves potentially against Ole Miss. Ole Miss failed that test. they're going to get the same thing from the South Carolina Gamecocks. Ole Miss will be the hunted in that game as well, and South Carolina probably thinks they can get the W in that game. How do you think they're preparing for this?
They're going to be locked in, Steven. For those who don't know, South Carolina's coming off a bye week, so you can probably expect Lenore Sellers, their quarterback, to be back at full strength. And when he was in the game, you got to remember he was given a really good matchup to LSU, and then he got pulled out because of injury. But if he continues to play, they probably beat LSU at home. So
they win that game.
Exactly. So just some things you got to take into account. And I just saw it in the comments, but for Ole Miss, how is Charlie Weiss and Lane Kiffin, how are they going to perform and script up drives after the first drive of the game? Are they going to adjust? Are they going to adapt? Or is it going to be just like Kentucky, where after the first drive, everyone's looking around and Jackson Dart's doing quarterback draws and screen passes to Trey Harris for 5 yards, And my last thing is, please get Juice Wells involved just for all the viewers in the game. Let's make this a little more exciting. Get number 3 the ball and let's go, man.
Yeah, Rashad Amos is a South Carolina transfer originally as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, why don't we make this a game that Rashad Amos actually contributes as well? He's a 1,000-yard rusher a year ago. Let that guy go with it as well. So we'll see exactly how that goes. Now, Josh, what's your thoughts on this week's game?
Well, Steven, I actually wrote down from hunter to hunted as well, too. And so that was a great point there. But no, I think we're going to learn. And this is the thing that's frustrated me, is that each week we say, we're going to learn something next week. We're going to learn something next week. It's time to quit looking at next week to learn something about this team. The time is now. There is no later. We talked about it all off season. This has always been wait till next year. This is next year. And now it feels like every other year. And it will feel like every other year if we go lay a dud at South Carolina, and it will be every other year. And so,
if Ole Miss loses to South Carolina, if they lay another dud, they're going to go 5-7 or 6-6.
Oh yeah, it's going to be total disaster. So we will find out all we need to know, and if we respond and we go to South Carolina and we take care of business, first of all, we just have to get a win. Okay, but we're good enough. We should be able to distance ourselves, even though they're really good on defense.
If Ole Miss plays well, they're going to beat South Carolina. If Ole Miss was played well, they would have beat Kentucky. But Ole Miss has to play well. It's on them. All of that Nick Saban stuff, all of that process stuff, that's what this is for.
Yeah.
Games like that Kentucky game, games like the South Carolina game, process-oriented stuff. Ole Miss has to prove that they can do that and be the hunted and have a little bit of energy to get things done. And not have I think that was an arrogant game plan with what that was a very arrogant game plan. And I know that they respected Kentucky's defense, but they knew that Kentucky had nobody that could match up with Trey Harris. And when Jackson Dart was just a little bit off, all of a sudden that became problematic and became 3 and outs. So anyway, thank you very much for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Tomorrow morning on the podcast, we are talking about how Jackson Dart might be relying just a bit too much on Trey Harris, and we go over the stats from the game and how that exactly looks. We talked about these running backs. We need to get more involved. We Pro Collective, we signed them. Where are they? That was a question. And we also looked at week 6 line. So we'll see that. We want to thank everybody for stopping by today. And hey, you guys come back next week, okay?
Thanks, Steven.
All right. Take care.